Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you very much, Mark, for bringing us to this point here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. I want to thank all the knowledge seekers for joining us on this platform. We are going through some amazing times with the cache technology and how it's evolving. And so I want to thank you for allowing me to continue to present the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are discussing basic nanotech. The subject today is causticity. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada, and it's a new month, June the 1st, 2025, and this is part of the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So as I say, I thank you all very much for joining us today, because what we're trying to do is to condense the knowledge in such a way that we can all take from this knowledge whatever we can handle and reprocess it in our own way. And as you can see, we've been doing this for many years, and there is a pattern, there's a sequence, and one of those patterns is the basic understanding that we have so much more to understand. We can, it seems that we can never understand enough. So we are trying to condense and put it in such a sequence that not only it's interesting for the mature knowledge seekers who have been here as the cornerstones of the shareholdings, but also the new knowledge seekers, which will come to reinforce everything, not only for us, but for themselves, because we are all here to bring heaven on earth. And that is really what the objective is. And if that isn't the objective, then we wonder, well, you'll have to tell us what the objective is, because I don't get it otherwise. So having said that, we're trying to bring the technology to the foreground as presented by Marian Tevakoli Keshe, who has written many books, of which the first book is The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And as we can see how 3 different types of matter are coming together.
Okay, I got that, Alex.
Thank you. And so there's matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And that's a way to refer to it. But as we're trying to bridge the knowledge between conventional science and advanced science, and try and understand our position within the universe. So these are good phrases, but another phrase is to see the coming together of three dimensions. And when we look at these three dimensions, and then we say, well, how do we get there? So in book number 2, we talked about the structure of light, which is kind of the conveyance that takes us from here to there. But if we are here where we have these three dimensions, and then we go over there and there's another three dimensions, then the question becomes, are those the same dimensions? And the only reason these questions arise is because the positioning of these dimensions is not differentiated. We use the term not differentiated to refer to cellular structures. So when a wound gets healed, the blastema cells are undifferentiated, but they do differentiate themselves. So we never have a problem where our toes would grow on our nose. It always is well organized. And then we find in book number 3, we're talking about the origin of the universe, and this is a very difficult subject for a lot of people to comprehend because it's unseen. So there is a sister universe that is manifested at the same time as our little universe is manifested. And as much trouble as we have with our universe, we seem to ignore this universe because we're just little specks in this universe that are riding on Earth, which is a little bit bigger than we are, but it's still a speck in terms of man's universe, and we seem to be quite content with that. And then that little speck, we chop it up into little bitty pieces, and we fight over it like scraps, where we're like so hungry for the crumbs, and we forget, the cake, or we forget the bread, or we forget the cookie. We're just always, always, always gravitating to that smaller thing. And in essence, as we go forth and multiply, our planet is getting smaller and smaller. But we make it smaller by chopping it up into little pieces. So for 380 weeks in a row, Rick Crammond and the Universal Council members have been bringing together the one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace. And we're obviously going to have to include one currency there as well. But the thing is, this is our home. And my home and your home are the same home. But as in all homes, that home is based on today. That's our home today. And the questions that we've never asked and should have asked is, where was our home before we got here? And where will our home be after we leave? And so a lot has to do with understanding how we got here and let's face it, where we're going. So if we understand the basic plasma rule, we understand that the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. This is fundamental because it brings all these energy fields together. And as they come together, that could be a point of conflict. But in actuality, it is a binding zone. So then it becomes your point of view. Does it have to be something that builds, or does it have to be something that divides? But when we bring it together on this planet, that is an inertia density manifestation. And that's what we're talking about in this basic nano series, the density manifestation exemplified in the plasma rule, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. So that energy binding is self-serving. That is very, very important. But many of us, practically all of us, have adopted it as self-serving at the expense of others, forgetting that this energy binding was created before us. In other words, that energy binding is what facilitated us to get here. So why do we stop depending on that? And what we find in that process, as we are binding, we're in fact hardening. And so where we go from that warm and fuzzy to that cushiony to that hardness, and it affects our emotion to the point where the emotion makes our heart harder. So what it is showing is a pattern of how we're going from that energy state to that physical state. But is that the ideal, desirable state? And what we find is that that pathway to that hardening is by not following the Ten Commandments. And the question, of course, as we've always been asking, is why do we need these Ten Commandments? What is our problem? And who is giving us these Ten Commandments, and why are they doing that? And then, of course, it's always assumed that if they are proposing those Ten Commandments, then they are also following those Ten Commandments. So how many times have you heard your parents say, well, just do as I say, don't do as I do? And of course, as adults, many of us are falling into the trap of the 11th commandment, which is a bonus, part of the bonus round of an extra 14 commandments, giving us a total of 24. But in this commandment, thou shalt not lie. And yet these lies are glorified in what we call a game of poker, or you might call it a game of chicken. It doesn't matter. The point is it implies a guesswork. And there is no guesswork in the universe. You provide the pattern, you get the energy, and that takes all the guesswork out of it, because it all has to do with path link and susceptibility. So if I have to depend on what you say, then I'm in a real pickle. But if I understand what your soul intends, then that becomes dependable, because the soul will never lie. So really, in effect, the soul doesn't need this commandment, thou shalt not lie. That's kind of redundant. So who needs this commandment? And that would be our physicality. So in that case, now we see that there is a distinct difference between the soul of physicality and the soul of man. And we see a distinct difference in our emotional and physical vitality. So one of the things that modern science has failed to achieve, and they brag about this because they're continually looking for donations, but like all my life, and in fact, historically, going back to the 1850s, and here we are in the roaring 2025 era, and we're still seeking the enhancement of our vitality. And it all boils down to energy. So whether it's our physical energy or whether it's our energy consumption through our use of all the facilities on this planet, we are always seeking this vitality. And some of us, too many of us, are seeking it at the expense of others. So this energy is coming to us via the transmutation highway, where we see that our physicality, which we understand we're organic, which means we're carbon based, and we see that the mass of the carbon is 12, and that's in the physical state. But we look at the transmutation highway, and it has actually two ramps. One is the carbon 14 highway, which also includes the carbon 10. That's a total of carbon 24. And we notice this pattern when we go in the transmutation highway, where we have the carbon 16 and the carbon 8, and that totals up to carbon 24. So we see clearly that there is a problem with our understanding of the basic rate, and that is that we we are not seeing the inertia highways. And the reason we don't see that is because we have to understand that our carbon-12 highway is actually a product. It's an inertia product of two other fields. So whatever created our carbon-12 mass was a derivative of the coming together of the fields to tally up to carbon-12. But if we look at the other highways, we see that they're already at carbon-24 because they have the two fields that come together. But if we understand that each of those fields is also a product, then we have to understand that there is, in fact, another creation of an inertia field. And so this leads us to the conclusion that the carbon is very much set up as carbon inertia highways. And why are these carbon inertia highways deemed so? Because there's a connection to something that is unseen. And so we often say, well, let there be light. Well, we have a limited amount of light because what we see is the opposite of the darkness. And if we look at the universe, we see that it is quite dark. So we don't notice that during the daytime, but we sure notice that at nighttime because the sky is dark and all we see is these little stars. And so these little stars are all part of the light, and it's coming from, well, it must be coming from the other side. And so on that basis, we can say that the other side is the light side and we're on the dark side. And so all we can see is what's filtered through and coming to our side. But the fact of the matter is that where we are is we're in the physical state, and that is a product of inertia. So what we're missing here is understanding that our existence here in our physicality is literally a coming together in the density, and that the initiation of that is the energy transfer that is coming from the plasma state, which we don't see. And so, how do you take into account something that you don't see? Well, that becomes our challenge, and to bring it into our regular practical application of our life. And so we needed to do that. And 5 years ago, we brought in the cups of life because they weren't the cups of pandemic, as we're trying to bring the advanced plasma science for the betterment of man, is to understand how we were reinforcing the inner space of man, where the emotional strength was residing, and that emotional strength was translated into our physical strength. And so this was our practical introduction to the nanocoding process of the monatomic science. Well, we've certainly progressed from there because we've seen the radiance manifestation of many, many ganses. Of particular note was the CO2 GANS and the calcium, zinc, and copper ganses, and the water and the amino acid. But, there's a lot of people who are not satisfied with that. They want to go for the gold. And as we know, men are not the only gold diggers out there. So that's where the track cup of the soul comes together, because that one track cup includes a magnetical gravitational relationship and a home for the soul. And when we add that to the emotional cup and the physical cup, then we have developed a new magnetical gravitational relationship and a new position of the soul. And so we find that this creates what we call a star formation. And so we see this replication of the one-track cup of life in the one-track cup of the universe, where we have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of our brain reflecting on the physical and emotional attributes of the copper and the zinc GANs. And then, of course, the transmutation highway connection via the carbogen. And that is the bringing together of the dimensions of 1 plus 1 plus 1 coming together. And of course, it's more than 3, because not only do we get our physicality, but we still have our brains intact, and we still have the left and right hemisphere functioning. And we are still universal functionaries as human beings on this planet, which on its own has its own grand central station and his own manifestation of many, many ganses. And all of these ganses are also inertia product fields coming together, and they come in variety of flavors. And this is all part of the inertia density manifestation. And so to satisfy this hunger for gold, we have now positioned ourselves as the Keshe Foundation in the beyond Beijing era, where through the conventional technology of plasma reactors, we could create gold out of thin air, because we were able to take the plasmatic manifestation of the gold, and through angular density, which involves the falling or the increased density, the increased pressure, the increased gravity, what they referred to as the fallen angels, which is actually the angular momentum, which equals the momentum of inertia times the angular velocity. And so we bring that into the manifestation of pure gold. But not only, we can create anything. And how do we know that? Because we just talked about the grand central station of the Earth. The Earth has produced anything. All the elements have been produced by the Earth. So how did it do that? And we pride ourselves on making our elements at the expense of the Earth. We basically dig it up. So when we're looking at the plasma science and the exchange of energy, we have to understand that each transition of energy, each level is a state. And as we transfer from one state to another, we go through 3 dimensions. The accumulation of these 3 dimensions is a sum of a transfer state. But in between, we have levels of progress through levels of magnitude, magnitude being 10 times on that scale. So if we take 1 and multiply it by 10, then we get 10. And if we multiply that by 10, we get 100. And then if we multiply that by the 3rd dimension, we get a kilo. And so if that pattern repeats, we get a mega and then a giga. And now in the computer industry, we're, flippantly discussing tera. But if we go into the micro, we go the other way by orders of magnitude, from 1 to milli to micro and to nano, which is what we are discussing in our basic nanoscience here, and understand that there's another level, that's the pico level. And this is all part of the plasma science. But if we see the difference between the plasma science and the old science, and it's not to be disrespectful, but in order to understand these extremes, you have to step out of the box. So in summary, what we've discussed in the nanotech is the migration from the monatomic to the monomolecular. And then as such, we created these nanocapsules and then nanotubes. And then from there, we created these monostars, which became nanostars. But there's more, because fundamentally, this represents the chains of man and that progress, because we're going from being chained to density in our gold digging attitudes at an atomic level to the unchained monatomic state, where we have the combination but it is in cooperation. And we see the same type of thing on the picoatomic, which is beyond the nano monatomic state. So fortunately for us, we have, can we call them microscopes? We were debating whether we should call them nanoscopes. Maybe we should call them picoscopes. And how far can we see? Because it still is a representation of our physicality. So as we said, these three dimensions and how they combine together, and we see that each axis has three dimensions. And so as we go from one point to another point, we find that we are specifically picking three reference paths. We're not picking three other reference paths. If we were to flip that around, then the paths would go in different areas, but they would arrive at the same conclusion. So that's where the variability comes in. And so the question then is, if one path as we see it is an extreme and the opposite of those paths is another extreme, when we bring these extremes together, we find that we can bring our three-dimensional understanding of physicality, the X, Y, and Z axis, together. And that would in fact recombine. So the point here is that the cubic structure of the combination of the three dimensions is actually a product of the extreme orientation of two other fields of extreme dimensions. Are those the only factors that can come together? So if we look at different types of three dimensions, and we can see that there are different types of crystalline connectivity and different types of crystalline stability, then we can see that there's a crystalline portability through different energy state transitions. And we are familiar with these energy state transitions as it pertains to solids, to liquids, to gaseous, and now to plasma state. And so depending on which axis you're looking at, they can create a different kind of three-dimensional portability. But those three dimensions remain. And those three dimensions are stable. So how can something that can be so pliable in its crystalline form be so stable? And so that leads us to our discussion today, because that stability is based on a magnetical gravitational relationship, which we have called a star formation. And so what we see is that there's a heavy gravitational aspect to it if we look at the three bottom points, and there's a lighter magnetical aspect to it if we look at the singular top point, and coming together it creates a star formation that has an orientation. And so when we look at the cover of book number 1, we see the coming together of three dimensions. So we look at the gravitational construct as being coming together of three dimensions. So what does that do for the magnetical construct? So it cannot exist in its singularity. It has to be an inertia product of three dimensions as well. And so we find this is true when we did the rotating bulbs, because what we did was we put ganses in there, each one, and we put them in a star formation, and we physically rotated these balls, and we did a live demonstration in Beijing where we showed this exact process. But we didn't just do it with one ball on each point. We did it with a pair of balls on each point. And so these pairs were also rotating. So they became dynamic reactors. And as such, they created a field strength around. And so we could see that the way these were positioned, we had three on the outer points, three pairs on the outer points, and one pair in the center. And so this became a very flat star formation. So we understand that we can do, with different types of appearances. So here's one appearance, and of course, our digging tool was a spoon. And so we put the spoons out to facilitate our gold digging. And of course, this was displayed to the public. And so what was unseen, of course, was the dynamic plasma that was created on each and every one of these rotating fields. And how far did that field go? Well, obviously, encompassed the entire room, because we created a dynamic plasma, which involved the magnetical and gravitational relationship of that plasma. And in that particular experiment, we were able to see the coming together of different energy states. So we had a plasma state and a dynamic plasma state. But we also had the physical matter state, and we had the GAN state. And then we had motors that turned the rotating balls. But we created something in the plasma state that didn't have any rotating physicality, but there was in the component, as we said, in the star component, a magnetical gravitational orientation. And so each point had a reference. And so in order to have a reference, we have to have a second point. And that point would be opposite. And then we created connection where we had gravitational stability. So that was where the soul of inertia was sitting in the star formation inertia field, where we had the convergence and divergence on one side, matching the convergence and divergence on the other side, facilitating conversion to an inertia field that exemplified gravitational stability. So this was a representation of how creation happens. And as part of that creation, we're referred to as the four wheelers of creation, because if you take two reactors that rotate on one side and two wheels on the other side, and how we keep that together is because we create this inertia bonding factor to keep everything together. But clearly in this picture, we see that there was no ropes or links between the pairs of reactors. So in fact, we had 8 wheels turning that were in our physicality. So as they all worked together, we created a star matrix bonding pattern in between. And in order to maintain that consistency of that bonding pattern, we had to see that the poles were actually flipping on their ends so that we could have a relationship across the inertia binding field that represented the gravitational magnetical orientation, because that's how we created the containment. So last week we talked about portability, and we seen that it was undifferentiated simplicity. Just like we said earlier, when the cells heal, the blastema cells are undifferentiated. But we can't make a mistake by putting our toes on our nose, because we have a differentiated complexity. So we have 73 trillion cells in our body, and each one's different. And that complexity is more stable. And so that stability leads to portability, because we have now created a gradient of stability, which actually is a charge. That's how the cells can differentiate. They know their position, because each position has a different charge. And when we say a different charge, it isn't just negative or positive. There's a difference in its gradient. So how negative is it? How positive is it? And hydrogen is an important factor in this energy. We are dependent on hydrogen, because hydrogen is the initial element in the periodic table of elements. But hydrogen itself is not just hydrogen, because it too has an orientation where the poles can align or the poles can be opposite. So the hydrogen molecules stay together with a covalent bond that is not visible. But there is a difference between the orthohydrogen and the parahydrogen, and yet it maintains its balance, because both poles balance themselves out on both sides. So whether they repel on both sides. Whether they attract on both sides. But there's a difference. Hydrogen is not just hydrogen. And so now we understand that negative and positive is not just negative or positive. It is the NP junction, which brings together the inertia tracking of the transition matter, which on one side would be negative, coming together the three dimensions, balanced off by the one side positive, coming together the three dimensions on the other side. And so here we have a 1 and 1 is 2. And that's just the basic dimension, but we have three dimensions. So on each dimension, we have 1 and 1 is 2. But we are none of those dimensions. We are the observer dimension. So each dimension then, being 1 and 1 is 2, means that we have three dimensions, each dimension coming together, and we are in a fourth dimension. Or are we? What we're talking about is the conservation of energy. So as the laws of conservation of energy state that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, it can only be converted from one form of energy to another. And that's exactly what we're talking about. So when we're looking at the star formation, in lieu of conservation of energy, it's actually the conservation of a maggrav, which is the balancing of the magnetical gravitational fields. And as we see, the maggrav is a balance between the initial kinetic energy and the initial potential energy, and that relationship, versus the final kinetic energy and the final potential energy. So the conservation of the maggrav is the maggrav on one side equal to the maggrav on the other side, conserving the energy what is the energy form? Well, it's undifferentiated at this point, right? Because we don't have any reference here. And so we see that we can have the conservation of inertia when we introduce a reference to different states, like atomic state and nanostate and GAN state. But there are other states. There's a plasmatic state, and then there are other states beyond that. And so each of them is a MagRav energy transfer state. And which state you're in, it all depends on the matter-gen convergence. And that convergence indicates its susceptibility to move from state to state or stay within the state. And that's how we have the pH scale, which is the potentiation of hydrogen. And we see that the susceptibility is changeable. And its range goes from unstable to stable, or from simple to complex. And we've said that. And it goes from magnetical to gravitational. We've said that. But it also means it goes from acidic to alkaline. And so what we find is that there is a movement that comes in various increments, and each increment is an order of magnitude. So to understand the pH scale, we have to understand it as a kind of a zipper, because the measurement of the pH is based on, we use water as the reference, because water is the universal solvent and it's fundamental for life. So water includes oxygen, which is something fundamental for us to breathe with. But it also indicates different potentiation layers. So the point of the matter is that wherever you are on that pH zipper, it indicates coming together of two transfer states, two transition states coming together to create a junction. And so that moves along the y-axis transition, as we discussed before. So if we have a pH of 4, we also have a pH of 10. The scale is 14, so 4 and 10 is 14. You can't have one without the other, or you'll be violating the laws of conservation of MagRav. So the same is true for 5 or 9. That equals 14. 6 and 8 equals 14. So what happens to 7? Oh, well, there we are with that neutral one. We only see the 7, but 7 is only half the scale, because 1 to 7 is acidic and 7 to 14 is alkaline. So we have to add those two together to come to 14. So it's 7 plus 7, just like we see on the transmutation highway with the carbon-12. It has another dimension. And so another way to look at it is through a pH density range, because each point on that pH scale is coming together, as outlined in book number 1, Universal Orders of Magnitude of Universal Creation of Matter. You have acid is oily, alkaline is wet. And so the gravity seeks density. Oxygen, of course, is more dense than hydrogen, right? Oxygen is 16. Hydrogen is 1. Well, actually, on the elemental table, oxygen is registered as 8 and hydrogen is 1, but still, it's a enormous difference. So the oxygen plus the hydrogen would equal 9. Well, 9 is just a little bit less than 10, which is an order of magnitude. So if we understand that each pH is a splitting, then each pH is an inertia product of two other fields that create that. So interestingly enough, the potentiation of bacteria plays into this as well. So we find that as a bacteria moves into the acidic state, it eats the host. But in the alkaline state, it supports the host. This bacteria is fundamental for digesting food. So if we are alive, shall we say, in our physicality, then this bacteria keeps us healthy by digesting the food that we eat. But if we suddenly stop being physically alive, we have now changed our energy state, and the bacteria responds accordingly, because change in the state also changes the pH, which triggers a reaction. And that's how the bacteria decides to either support the host or eat the host. So we can see that the strength of the field is actually a two-way street. We can be weak, or we can be strong, or we can be any point in between. And so there's a transition based on the susceptibility, and it's always coming together. And where on that point can we be? So wherever that point is actually a point of balance. But what we find is that when we talk about an acid state, it is actually acid forming. And when we talk about an alkaline state, it is alkaline forming. And so the alkaline forming state takes us towards health, and an acid forming state takes us to poor health. And so we see the range. So today's topic is causticity. And when we look at ammonium chloride, we find that it's an inorganic chemical compound. We are organic beings. So what is important about this compound is that its formula is NH4 and chlorine. And it's an ammonium salt of hydrogen chloride. Well, I started going down this rabbit hole, and I'm going to take you with me, because it's a big rabbit hole. And we are going to introduce a lot of terminology. So it's kind of important to see how the context of this terminology fits together. So if we're talking about the balance of energy, then we see that the ammonium cations, NH4, that's plus, and the chloride anions, that's the Cl minus, come together as a crystalline white salt. And fortunately, it's highly soluble in water. So the solutions of the ammonium chloride are mildly acidic, and is naturally occurring mineralogic form. It is known as sal ammoniac. This mineral is commonly formed on burning coal dumps from condensation of coal-derived gases. And it is also found around some types of volcanic vents. So this really opens up a can of worms here. So let's just look at the picture on the right, and we're looking at a representation of its crystalline structure, and we find it's a cube. And that corners of the cube are all chlorine. And what's in the center is actually the sodium sodium hydroxide. No, excuse me. It's the NH4. But the structure is a body-centered cubic. And the cubic contains a star formation. Well, isn't that interesting? Ammonium chloride is an inorganic chemical. It's a crystalline salt. It's a salt of hydrogen chloride. And it is mainly used as a fertilizer. It's also used as a flavoring agent in some types of licorice. It is a product of the reaction of hydrochloric acid and ammonia. Well, there you go. Two fields create one. So the ammonium chloride is an inertia product. And in its solid form, it's used to make dry batteries and ammonia compounds, such as a soldering flux, a pickling agent. It's used in zinc coating and tinning, and of course as a fertilizer. When we make our nano coating, we were using sodium hydroxide. Its crystalline structure is sodium NaOH, also known as caustic soda. Well, that's what we're discussing today, causticity. And this is a corrosive white solid that is used in various industrial and household applications. It's a strong alkali and is soluble in water also. And its solutions are strongly alkaline and corrosive. So, not to be played around with, but potassium hydroxide is also an odorless white or slightly yellow, flaky, or lumpy solid, which is often in a water solution and is used in making soap, and is an electrolyte in alkaline batteries and in electroplating, lithography, and paint and varnish removers, liquid drain cleaners. And they contain 25 to 36% of potassium hydroxide. So the common thing here is the water. And the water comes together from condensation. So this is a process where water vapor becomes liquid. It is the reverse action of evaporation. This is where liquid water becomes a vapor. So condensate is a product of condensation as a liquid reduced from a gas or a vapor. So in plasma terms, we can say that the production of water is an inertia product field. So the condensation becomes an inertia product field. And obviously, the water is more dense than the gas. And obviously, through the process of condensation, we have changed the energy state. And many times we see what we call precipitation. So what is precipitation? Well, the main types include drizzle, rain, sleet, snow, ice pellets, and graupel, and hail. Precipitation happens when water vapor reaching 100% relative humidity saturates a portion of the atmosphere. A portion of the atmosphere. Check that out. So that the water condenses and precipitates or falls. So what we're talking about is the portability of energy versus the dilution of energy. So the dilution, you stay within that same state. But when you do the portability of energy, then you're actually changing the state. So we've already concluded that through condensation, the precipitation becomes a change in the energy state. But that energy state has different facets. So it can be everything from drizzle to grapple. Wasn't that interesting? Well, what is grapple? It's good. I'm glad you asked that question because it's a type of precipitation. It's a soft hail or snow pellet, and it's consisting of small, white, opaque ice crystals that are fragile and easily disintegrate. So this is new to me. I apologize for having to say that because I never heard of grapple until today. But what I have noticed is a funny snow this winter. But they say it forms when supercooled water droplets freeze onto snowflakes. So they create these small rounded pellets. So the grapple is distinct from hail, which is larger and harder. So this answers a very important question for me because I didn't know what this kind of snow was. I'd never seen it before. I only seen it this year. Maybe I wasn't observant enough. But now that I remember seeing it, I questioned what it was, and lo and behold, it's grapple. And we've seen, of course, the creation in our frozen Gans balls. We see a gravitational core where the magnetical hairlines, they're hair-like lines that grow as nanotubes, and these nanotubes are hollow, as we know. So we talked about nanotubes and how they grow into nanostars, and we can clearly see that there is a pattern that's forming. Well, another new word that I learned was rhymes. I'm going to learn a lot of new words. Well, rhymes is frost, and frost is a thin white layer of ice, unlike the ice cube that we just seen that forms when the air temperature is below the freezing point of water, and especially outside at night. And there was a strong rhyme on all vegetation. Okay, well, this is another learning thing for me. So the definition of rhyme is an ice crystal forming a white deposit, especially in objects outside. And of course, the synonyms are frost, hoarfrost, ice, water, ice. So rhyme is actually an archaic form, and it originally was any frozen dew forming a white deposit on exposed surfaces, also called a hoarfrost. Well, this is good. I often wondered about that. Lost a lot of sleep at night. Didn't know what a rhyme was and didn't know what a hoarfrost was. Well, let's continue. A hoarfrost is when frost forms as minute ice crystals covering the ground. And so we just seen that these crystals can grow, right? We just called it all frost, but sometimes the frost grains grow larger and are called hoarfrost crystals. So good hoarfrost is not that uncommon if you watch for it. So this is a project to remember as we go into winter. Hoarfrost grows whenever it's cold outside and there is an ample source of water vapor nearby. Yes. So from the plasma science, we've seen that the core was growing these nanocrystals, which were hollow. And so we could say that the hoarfrost is growing the same way, because we've already said in the conventional science that these crystals grow. So you have to have a basis, an inertia field from there. That inertia field is more dense. So as the nanotubes grow, they become less dense. So the creation of the hoarfrost is based on the gravitational creation of the crystal, and the growth of the hoarfrost is based on the magnetical addition to that hoarfrost. Well, isn't that interesting? So we see that there are various types of frost that include the crystalline frost, called the hoarfrost, or it's also called a radiation frost. Well, isn't that interesting? And so this comes from the deposition of water vapor from air of low humidity. It's a white frost in humid conditions. You also see it as a window frost on glass or other surfaces. You have advection frost from cold wind over cold surfaces. And you also have black frost without visible ice. We know how dangerous that is. And at low temperatures and very low humidity. Seems to be kind of contradictory. How do you produce frost in low humidity? So the most common frost are radiation frost, which we have already called hoarfrost. So there's advection frost, window frost, and rime radiation. Now you're starting to put the whole picture together. Yes, frost is frost in the form of tiny ice crystals that usually show up on the ground and on exposed objects outside. So hoarfrost also forms in refrigerators and freezers. So there you go. You don't have to wait for winter to come. So clearly we can see that there are various ways of energy portability. Advection and convection are both processes of transporting energy or matter in fluids, but they differ in their mechanisms. Advection is the bulk transfer, advection is the bulk transport of a property, like temperature, by the fluid's velocity, while convection involves the movement of the fluid itself due to density. And the differences are caused by temperature changes. So even when it's cold, we can see that there are gradients of temperatures. And within that range, those gradients still maintain the stability of that energy state. But those energy states move. And as such, they carry energy. And depending on which way they go, indicates the direction of portability. So it all is actually exemplification of energy transfer. And that's what we're talking about. So even though it's cold, we're still talking about heat energy portability. So this is heat transfer is the movement of thermal energy in the form of heat. And it's between physical systems with different temperatures using 4 different distinct mechanisms: advection, conduction, convection, and radiation. So advection is defined here as transport responding to a pressure gradient or body force. Molecular diffusion is defined as a transport responding to concentration or thermal gradients. So with convection, natural convection occurs when fluid moves due to density differences caused by temperature variations. Forced convection occurs when an external source, such as a fan or a vehicle radiator, is used to move fluid in a controlled manner. What happens when we get to extreme alkalinity? We get what we call causticity, which is the quality of being physically caustic. It involves burning and corrosive action. It imparts a pH change. It imparts an energy state change. And we've seen that change go from atomic to monatomic. But we've also seen it go further. So we've already discussed that part of the movement of energy is radiation. And so we see that there is a radiation portability as well, because the nuclear radiation expands beyond the containment. The plasma science is a containment of this radiation. And the transmutation of radiation is the plasmatic transport system of energy portability. So in nothing that we've discussed with these new definitions and terminology has referred to this. But now we can see what a radiant flash is. It's a temporary feeding of energy, and obviously is going through a transition. Suddenly, it's a flash. In talking about caustic, we talk about soda ash. And soda ash, excuse me, is a sodium carbonate. One moment. Thank you. I'm back. Sodium carbonate is known as a washing soda, a soda ash, a sal soda, and soda crystals. And it too is an inorganic compound. But it has a formula sodium and CO3, which is a carbonate. And it has various hydrates. All forms are white, odorless, water-soluble salts that yield alkaline solutions in water. Historically, it was extracted from the ashes of plants grown in sodium-rich soils. And because the ashes of these sodium-rich plants were noticeably different from the ashes of wood, which were once used to produce potash, sodium carbonate became known as soda ash. It is produced in large quantities from sodium chloride and limestone. It uses what's called the solvate process. So there we go. Sodium, excuse me, the soda ash is a combination, it's an inertia product field of the combination of the sodium chloride and the limestone. So this is made by carbonating sodium hydroxide, which is made using the chloralkali process. There is an extreme way to do this. It's called fire. This is an extreme state transition. And this involves continuous feeding. So we can see that there are a lot of different ways to do energy portability. So energy portability is an energy state transition. And the two extremes are elevation, which is taking the physical matter state to the energy state, and the inertia, which is taking the energy state to the physical matter state. So when we talked about the pH, we referenced it in physical terms as a wave transition along the y-axis. And we said that the pH involves the inertia product of two different pHs. And so as a wave, this is a stable energy transition state. So within that pH, we have different gradients. But the fact of the matter is that it is a logarithmic scale, in other words, orders of magnitude. And to be able to go from one pH to another pH, that involves actually a minor state change. There has to be a difference between the 4 and the 5. The 4 is opposed by the 10. 10 and 4 is 14. The 5 is opposed by the 9. 9 and 5 is 14. So each of those states is a product, an inertial product field. But to go from one pH to another, it's an indication of causticity. So that becomes an unstable energy transition state because it's no longer going to be a wave to stay within the one pH. It's literally going to have to change that pH. So if you're going from a inertial product field of an acid condition and you want to go into a higher energy state, you have to go in the direction of causticity. So that becomes a pH causticity transition. So when we talk about the Z-axis stairway to heaven, we say, well, to go from one pH to another pH, and we link up the different pathways, and we say, well, we can go from a lower pH to a higher pH. Are we stepping up into that platform? Or is the reality a stairway to density, where we're stepping down into the atomic physicality, and then to be able to move from one pH to another, we have to literally jump up. There has to be a sudden transition, not a gradual transition. So in other words, within the logarithmic scale, we have another logarithmic scale, which steps us down within that pH. But to go from one pH to another pH, we have to jump. Of course, if we're coming from the alkaline side, then we have to drop. So either way, it's a stairway to density. And we can go up and we can go down. And either way, it's sudden. So literally, when we're looking at the pH causticity, in order to understand, are we dealing with a lower pH or a higher pH? And what is the direction that we're going? We find that it all leads to either a party or a disaster. A party where we have more of the same, or a disaster where everything gets destroyed. Or does it? Or does it just go to an energy transfer into another state? Well, the answer to that question is when we created the periodic table of elements, do we destroy something to create something else? Whatever that something else is an inertial product field. And so now we are introducing different types of energy transfer influencers: phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine, sodium, potassium. They all have to do with extreme energy transfer. This energy transfer changes the energy state. Did we destroy when we went from atomic to monatomic to create the nano? Did we destroy when we went from nano to pico? Did we destroy when we went from nano to GANs? And did we destroy when we went from GANs to plasma? So the pH stairway of both poles, one is the elevation through causticity. Then there are many potential plasma layers in between, each one a reflection of the potentiation of hydrogen. But then we have the inertia, which is based on the mag-grav positioning. So when we're talking about the nuclear feeding inertia, each one is a fragment of the complexity. Each one is seeking a gravitational stability, and each one is capable of a dimensional portability. And since we are saying that 1 + 1 + 1 is more than 3, and since we are the ones saying it, we are not any one of these three. So now we understand what it meant by the relationship of the acidity and alkalinity. When we look at hypochlorous acid, it's antibacterial. That means it's acidic. pH of 2.4. That means the opposite is antiviral. That's alkalinity. And gasinations, using the terrain theory, was able, with pH, to change the nature of the bacteria into a virus, and then change it from a virus back to a bacteria simply by changing the pH. And this accident was repeated 40 times in a row. And what we find is that there's a similar relationship with a DNA, where the DNA elongates in an acidic condition, but it compacts in an alkaline condition. And there is a balance in there, and it's called very healthy, and it's slightly alkaline. And that is a reflection of ATP production. So we find that poor ATP production is acidic, and a healthy ATP production is alkaline. ATP, of course, being adenosine triphosphate, which is the currency of life. It reflects energy transfer and energy portability. But there is a problem. Bacteria is filterable, and viruses are not filterable. So one has to wonder, how do we know that it's a virus if we can't see it? Are we only looking at the inertia product field? So the viruses of the universe facilitate the RNA portability. So that portability of energy can be patterned. It's reflected in the RNA, and it depends on the gradient. And so that gradient can change That change could be elevation through causticity, or there are many potentiation plasma layers, or it can be changed through maggrav positioning. That would affect its inertia, which is a product field. And so isn't it interesting that they refer God's portability as hoarfrost, as a symbol of God's power? Hoarfrost is also used in the Bible to illustrate God's control over the natural world. And in the book of Job, one of the oldest and most poetic books in the Bible, hoarfrost is mentioned as part of a broader description of God's command over the elements. Isn't that interesting? So there are different maggrav pathways, and they all facilitate gravitational intensity or magnetical outtensity. These are representations of the force fields of attraction, which we call feedback, and the force fields of repulsion, which we call feeding. And I'm sure you can all see the difference, how the electron is magnetical, and of course the neutron, being more dense, is way more gravitational. And we see how all of that works together. And then we say, well, what happened in the beginning? Well, the neutron came before the atom because it was the neutron that split, because they said, let there be light. And so we had the combination of the electron proton, which was the atom, but we also had the PM tick, which was the energy. So that energy came from the darkness, didn't it? And that's what we said, because the PM tick is the principal matter that comes from God. It is part of the cosmic universe, which is magnetical. The energy is flowing to us as an energy pack, and each energy pack is in a nice parcel. And they come together and they create the antimatter, dark matter, and the matter force, which goes through a plasmagen conversion. It isn't until it positions itself on the inertia field we call Earth, and that creates a new inertia field, which we call our physicality. So the inertia field of the Earth is a gravitational maggrav inertia field. The physicality is an inertia gravitational maggrav field. And then our existence here is a inertia gravitational maggrav field. So it's coming together of the plasma inertia fields. And so we find that each field coming together represents one side of the duality, magnetical and gravitational, and all points in between. So we understand the rotating hemispheres that create our planet. And it doesn't matter where we are on this planet, our feet are always on the ground, as opposed to being on the ceiling. So the reference is to the Earth space, direct. And that principal matter that comes from the universe comes into us as an undifferentiated plasma, energy that is portable. And it comes together into our energy fields and represents like a nanocapsule, but it has different types of tensity, different levels, different layers. And then, based on its position, it manifests into the physical matter state. So we have the non-physical matter state, which you can't touch or see, and then we have the physical matter state, which you can touch and you can't see. But either way, this is all part of the matter plasma dimensions. And we are feedback dominant because this is all part of the feedback system. The feeding system, which originally came from the PM ticks, is actually substituted by the plasma matter. But in reality, it comes from the source. And that's where we have to understand that when we're looking at the light that is emitted in the emission spectrum of hydrogen, that is the gravitational confirmation that the energy is coming from somewhere. And it is a combination of different magnetical fields. So the transference of these magnetical fields and the coming together creates a gravitational condition. And so we take that hydrogen and we keep building on it. And then we add water through the acquisition of oxygen, sorry. So we have H2O. That becomes an energy parceling unit. And that can go through different stages of tension. And we know that because of the surface tension of the water molecule. And then it can precipitate or it can evaporate. And its fundamental component is oxygen. That's why it precipitates, because it has a gravitational conformation, again, of energy that is coming together from the magnetical sources. And it manifests itself into a light signature we call the emission spectrum, and it's unique. So we can see that these layers are all coming together in multiple layers, and each one is a captured field, and each one is an inertial product dimension, and each one is undifferentiated until it comes into a certain position, and then it becomes differentiated. And each of these densities becomes manifest, and each of them is a multiple dimension of multiple spheres. So if we have multiple layers in the magnetical side, we also have multiple layers on the gravitational side. And so we can transition through all of these different layers and have different layers of containment. And so if that is true, then that is how we can maintain our position on Earth. And we know that is true. So it only stands to reason that we can do this in outer space as well. So when we look at the obstacles that we have, we can see that there are starters, which are pathway seekers, but there are also stoppers, which are pathway blockers. And so there are those who are connivers, they are pathway avoiders. But then there are facilitators, and they are linkage creators. So you make your choice. Which reactor did you want? And so we have another reactor that's a peace dome reactor. As we're all seeking gold and the creation of gold, we are also having to shield ourselves from those who don't want that to be created. And so in that position, the peace dome reactor does not manifest in the physicality, but dilutes it and changes its transition zone, changes its energy transition state. And so we can create this humanity inertia shielding to shield ourselves from hostiles, from aggression, from environmental harm, and from fear mongering. And we're not doing that just because of the problems on Earth. We're doing that because the universe is a big place, and there are a lot of different variations. And for us, we need to have a refuge. We need to have a place of safety. So wherever we are, we need to absorb the energy that we need and shield ourselves from the energy we don't need. But at no point do we have to steal it from others. And at no point do we have to lie to ourselves, because that's stealing from ourselves. So this is where our understanding of the universal cup comes in, where we see our physical destination state coming together with the dynamic transfer state. And then that lends us to what we call the universal portability, which allows us to move anywhere that we want to. Do we know where we want to? If we don't know that we can, and if we don't know where, then it becomes really difficult to know how. But the fact of the matter is that there is a universal portability, and we know that because we were born, and because we exist, and because our soul feeds us. So we need to tune into that and turn on to the energy of the universe and drop out from our resistance so that we can receive all the energy. And to facilitate that, we have to provide the pattern so that we get this energy without wasting energy. And the Kesh Space Plasma research teams coming together, not only to create gold on this planet, but to create gold in our soul so that it shines across the universe with peace and prosperity. There are many points on the dove. And this is where the transmutation maybe has a limitation. So the range transition transcends the inertia field transmutation dimensions. And the laws of conservation govern the covalent, trivalent, tetravalent bonding attributes. The containment of inertia is manifest through the contention of equality. But the contention of equality cannot be abandoned or compromised because that's a reflection of the soul of man. And so the color of man is based on the integration with the soul of the man. That's the integrity of the man. So when we look at our augmented reality and we understand that there's a flux and a flow, as we see that it goes towards, to, into, within, through, out of, and from every charge, every form, all mass, matter of substance. We need to learn how to intensify and extensify what we are. Because we are and we need to be connected. That connection supports the flux of continuous change. And that connection is hooked on life. 592 weeks in a row, we've been bringing the Knowledge Seekers workshops together to educate, to bring together the possibility and the prospect of peace on earth. And peace on earth cannot happen without the concentrated efforts of all of humanity. It isn't just about prosperity. It's about our well-being. And our well-being transcends to the well-being of the universe. Because when our neighbors are sick, our community is sick. And so if we are part of the unhealthy component of the universe, then the universe is also unhealthy. So we have to make that choice. This is where the technology release has to come together. And until then, we can't sleep because our beds are burning. We need a scientific rescue, a financial rescue, and a political rescue. This rescue is a preservation rescue. So we are in the process of flying with the captain to learn how to travel through outer space. And this will carry on for several months, May, June, and July. And the next session will be coming this month. You can join us. And to understand how you can travel the various dimensions. Understand that as a traveler, you're not in those dimensions. You are traveling through those dimensions. So we can converge in our matter state or we can fly through the universe. And wherever we go in the universe, we can converge in a matter state. Isn't that wonderful? It brings peace to our soul, brings peace to our heart. Keshe Foundation, Spaceship Institute, Teachings on Plasma Science. Welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. There's a World Peace Treaty. Choose it, sign it, mean it. The true nanotech maintains integrity of a new dawn. Is the peace dome of outer space an umbrella or a fountain? Is the inertia of the present governed by the dimensions of history? You decide. It is time to learn the encapsulation of self in a universal context, because the inertia of self can migrate as a superconductor, and the threshold of causticity enables energy portability of many new physical transmission dimensions. So the plasma science needs to be continued daily and delivered via the Peace Dome in a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. Thank you all for letting me present. I hope you enjoyed this session.
And thank you, Alex, for opening up new dimensions. I think this teaching alone can be opened up for probably the next number of years. So thank you, and let's see if any of the participants would like to interact or ask a question about what you've just covered, and I'm sure you just covered it rather simply in a way, not to say your simple understanding, but just in a very general or simpler way, but it certainly is enlightening. And that's what this whole process is about. Becoming more enlightened to the creation and understanding these processes. So, does anyone have a comment or a question for Alex? You know, Mr. Keshe said he took us through the nano and the GANs and the dynamic reactors and the rest of this. Is the pico is below the nano, and was he using that process? Maybe you want to comment on the Big Bang theory, and was he using a sort of a pico, because these elements had to be, before they actually manifest, I'm sure they were interacting on a very, very tiny level we couldn't see. And then when it hit a certain level, it manifested as, well, he said it was energy. But was he using pico in this demonstration, perhaps, in Beijing?
Well, no, we can't see the pico with the naked eye. You know,
Right, and we
even
couldn't see the material until it manifested itself. So I'm thinking that all before we saw the manifestation, there was interactions at the pico level.
Well, what's interesting, if you look at the pico atomic structure, it seems to be a star formation. So it's actually a picostar.
Okay.
So the manifestation of the picostar has points. So those points are smaller than the picostar, right? That's how small they are. And so from the pico becomes the substructure of the nano, becomes the substructure of the atomic. Now you have an atomic plasma condition. How do you bring that in to the physical state? The physical state being a we've called it a condensation field or a precipitation field, but actually it's a manifestation field of inertia density. Well, who is the facilitator? And that was a really, really remarkable thing, because until then it was undifferentiated, wasn't it? It was black. It wasn't until we stuck the finger in it that we could see what happened. Isn't that correct? So what does that mean?
That means the creation starts from the smallest of the small and builds up. And this was what he was trying to emphasize, I think, in this exhibition about putting a few holes in this Big Bang theory. Would you think that was being achieved here? Is this what he was trying to show? That was one of the things I know he was trying to show, that the creation doesn't happen with the Big Bang. It happens from the smallest of the small and then builds up from there. And of course, he said he had the time technology as well hidden within the system. So I'm thinking that this all started at very, very, very small interactions and then built up, because we didn't see the material right away, did we? It took a number of hours or a period of time for all these systems to interact. So there must have been still things going on in a very, very small pico range, I'm thinking. And then it built up from there. But again, this is just my simple understanding of it.
Well, what's wrong with that simple understanding? Because that's exactly what happened, Mark. So, as frequently as you do, you ask a question and then answer it at the same time. This is very important to understand, that it wasn't there before and now it is there, but it didn't manifest until it had another Magrav condition, and that Magrav condition was us. So the way that we create our physicality is exactly the same way that we created the gold. We are the ones who created it, because we are the ones who facilitated an inertia density manifestation. Until such time, it was pure energy.
Yes.
So the physical manifestation was dependent on the earth state. But if we remember that this technology that was demonstrated was obsolete, now we understand how the next advancement is, that it totally bypasses the need for us to manifest the gold. The earth can manifest the gold on its own. And how do you know that? Because we have all these gold diggers going all around the planet digging up the gold. And they don't stick their finger in, they stick a massive excavator in and dynamite and everything to extract and take from what the inner earth has bound together in an inertia density manifestation. They call it a mineral. And the mineral that we were looking for is based on the emission spectrum that identifies that mineral. And if you're looking for gold and you see that emission spectrum, then that's where you dig. But the digger is not the creator. The earth was the creator. So this technology here that we were demonstrating was technology that was demonstrated in 2023, and it is now obsolete. This is how the new advancements in science need to go. We don't need 1,000 years to go through some kind of progress. We marvel at how fast the technology has moved since World War II. which was 80 years ago. So now we can do this in a matter of a few years. It only stands to reason that we're going to be able to do that in a faster rate. So by changing the rate, you change that by changing the gradient. How do you change the gradient? You can create a gradient in the product field. You can create a gradient in the substrate. And you can change the position to put it in another field that is a higher attractive force. That attractive force is highly gravitational. Do you have to do it only exclusively on Earth? And so the answer there is obvious. You don't need to be a rocket scientist or a space scientist or a plasma scientist to figure it out. Just look up into the sky. There are other planets, and they have all formed the same way. They all follow the same rules. You can't have, the rules aren't different. You can't have one rule for Mars and one rule for Earth, or one rule for Jupiter. It doesn't stand to reason. It's like having a difference between, rules for corn and the rules for a carrot. You ask any farmer and how you grow things, and they will always tell you the same thing. And this is tried and tested methods that were handed down generation by generation through success. And then we created more success, where we increased the yield of the harvest by over 300%. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you that the methods that we were using were improved upon. You don't scrap the methods. You have to explain how those methods operated. And so what we've done with fertilizers is we've said, well, you put the fertilizer and the plant will grow. But how did you create the fertilizer? And when we didn't have the fertilizer, did the plants grow? Well, when we look at the dinosaurs and those that are flash frozen and they still have the vegetation in their mouth, which is how we know that they are vegetarians. So there's a skeleton of a dinosaur and there's the vegetation in the mouth. So we know there was the physicality of the dinosaur and the physicality of the vertical people. So who do you believe? If you can't believe, what we've discovered, and then we come up with other excuses, we have to say, well, wait a second. This Earth is doing very well without our interference. So why is our interference not working the way it should be? Because it was working well before we got here. So by the fact that we are here, it should work better. And if the results are showing that it's not better, then that pretty well tells you the whole story that you need to know.
Right. And who would consider that this planet needed certain things in certain places, like the gold or the aluminum or the copper or the oil? I thought it was all there for us to harvest in a way or to take and convert. But with this new understanding, it seems like the entity itself needed these things. And so we're probably, in a way, by taking it, we're affecting the entity's some sort of ability or some sort of elevation in a way. It's just like I have two ears, and someone could say, well, gee, I need one ear. Can I just take one? And you still have one left. But obviously, that would really affect my emotional character and the rest of this. So we haven't really understood that the planet needs these things in certain positions that's part of its creation. but we thought it, or I thought it was there just to harvest. Find the gold and take as much as you'd like. But it needs that. It needs the oil too, even though it can replace it and refill these oil deposits and the rest.
Well, I know for a fact that in the 1970s that oil was not considered a renewable fuel
Right.
or a renewable resource. But now we realize that it is. So, that contention was based on false knowledge. So now that we know differently, now we can judge ourselves accordingly. So until we replace this technology, we will be using that old technology. So the question is, how long are we going to, do that? So it just becomes a philosophy that you have to adopt. And if you can do things better, then you stop doing things the way you did it and you start doing things the new way. So this is what peacekeeping is all about, isn't it? So if we can produce, shall we say, from thin air, all of these minerals, and we know that's possible because the earth already does that, then what are we fighting for?
Now, I know you talked about the pH as being the potentiation of hydrogen, correct? And
Yes.
as he told us, the motors on these reactors are an aspect of the matter state. And I sort of made up a little joke. You said each cell has a charge. Does that mean they're carrying American Express or a MasterCard or a Visa? You said they have a charge. But again, is this alkalinity and acidity an aspect of matter state? Or in a way, I'm thinking it's connected to matter state.
No, it's an aspect of matter state because matter state can exist in any of the pH scales. So, if something is of a pH, let's say, like I talked about hypochlorous acid, has a pH of 2.5, 2.5, it's water. But water has a pH of 7, and water has a pH of 11.5. It's highly alkaline. At that point, it emulsifies oil. So it's still water, but the pH is different. So the pH is a characteristic of the water, and it indicates a different kind of um, energy state that water can do. So we
Right.
find
I think he said he used the energy of the matter state to create the gold in the matter state, correct?
correct. And this is where we find that the energy is portable. But the question that I'm trying to we're trying to go very, very slowly. Mr. Kesh is going at an extreme clip, and that's good. I'm seriously happy about that. But from our point of view, because we don't have access to the latest research or classified information, we have to go a little bit slower. So the most important thing that we need to understand is that energy is portable, right? And that energy can go in gradients and that we can change that rate. So now what does that mean in terms of our life? Well, we are not geared up to withstand the rapid change. It'll be a flash for us, and that flash could be very destructive because we can no longer, contain it. So we have to do things much better, and so we need to ramp up our capability to cope with it. This is a challenge, and each and every one of us has to go through this challenge. And all we're saying is that follows on each and every one of us with respect to our own responsibility. We all have to cope with it individually so that we can cope with it collectively.
Okay. Anyone else want to raise an issue or make a point here or object to something that Alex said? Again, you're free to do any of those. We've been talking a lot about AI, and I'm thinking, and maybe we'll be bringing that into some of the private classes more and more. But is this AI or is this absurd intelligence? Something I think Mr. Kesh referred to it at this point as absurd intelligence. But I still think it has a huge offering in the conservation of energy, even though it's using a lot of energy and water to do certain things or to keep its position. Um, and it does need an extensive amount. But is this a form of conservation of energy in a way? And that will be extended more and more, I think. He's talking about transferring massive amounts of knowledge through the AI system. I mean, reaching billions and millions of people, or millions and billions of people over time. And so this AI is definitely, as I see it, a conservation of energy. Would anyone, or would you, Alex, like to speak on this? And I think it'll grow more and more.
Well, I think you made a marvelous point. Yeah, so I don't want to cut anyone off. So please jump in if you want to. I'm just going to comment and say I have never been a fan of the artificial intelligence because I to me, the artificial nature of it indicates a superficiality, and I've always been a proponent of substance. But as I've talked about today, we end up being like the keepers of the library, and the library has knowledge, and so we need to be managers of these uh, pieces of knowledge. They need to have references. They need to be able to be sorted and referenced, and they need to be put rapidly. But unless that knowledge comes out of the book, it's not going to. It's as if it's not there. So for us to gather that knowledge, we have to open up the book. Do we have enough time? And this was one of the things that happened to me 30 years ago. I was sitting in the library and I thought, well, if I want to be the smartest person in the world, well, wouldn't I want to read every book that's in here? And then I realized that there's a lot of books in there that, you feel sorry for the tree that was sacrificed to make the paper for the book. And then so you had to be very selective. And so the skill set had to be elevated to the point where I could make that selection and look at a series of books and decide which book that I wanted to look at. And that went beyond just the description of the book on the cover. Or there were many ways to decide. But the thing is that there had to be a consistency in terms of that thought. Well, the AI can cut right through that because it moves at a rate and shall we say many orders of magnitude faster than we can. And that's great. So we know that we can think faster than we can act, and sometimes we have, what we call a brain cramp, you have thoughts crashing together and you want to say a whole bunch of things and you end up mumbling because all these things are coming together. So we think faster than we talk. And we're all experiencing that as a problem. Well, the AI can also think faster than it can talk. But in order for it to talk, it has to be meaningful. And so it has accelerated its selection process. So what that means is that the AI is solving the problem that I ran into years ago in the library because it can very easily contain all the information that's in those books, but then it can certainly discern through consistency what is relevant. so this is a benefit. It's just like if you have a high hoe, you dig a hole, you have a shovel, you can only dig so much. But a high hoe will come and it'll dig a trench that'll be 100 times more than you can dig in the same time. It's much more efficient. It's a tool. Well, the AI is our tool. But the thing is that we are still differentiating between inorganic and organic. And this was a problem for me when I noticed the concrete grow. And the concrete grew the same way that the nanotubes grew on the plasma water once it was frozen. And say, well, how can that grow? Isn't growth a function of sentience? So we are sentient beings. And so if growth is associated with sentience, and the earth then is also growing, it must have sentience as well. And the plants are growing, so they're sentient, and the animals are growing, and all sorts of things are growing, and some at faster rates than others. So to divide our knowledge of our existence in terms of organic and inorganic, that was just a convenient way of, differentiating things between things that are animate with life and things that are inanimate. And it extends, the threshold came with the stone. So we would say, and me included, that a stone is inanimate. But according to the plasma science, the stone has a soul. So how can that soul reside in the stone and it be inanimate? Well, because of its density. And it must be in a dense state because it's in a physical state. And in that physical state, it must have a magnetical gravitational force field. And the soul is dependent on that. So when do you become a stone-bearing soul or a soul-bearing stone? And so we see what we call the hardening of the heart. And I'm not talking about things that are related to pandemics. I'm talking about the emotion where there's no compassion for humanity. You have to be what we call hard-hearted. And that's what that means. Your heart turns to stone. So how does something that's nice and warm and cushy become hard as a rock? Becomes more dense. And when it becomes more dense, well, it seems to lose its animation. So we have to find a balance. And we have to understand what life is all about.
Right. Even at absolute zero, you would think there's no activity at all, but now we understand there is activity going on even at absolute zero. It's not a static position.
Exactly.
Anyone else want to bring an issue or a question? I was sort of, does somebody have their hand up? Oh, sure, Gallup, please, you don't need your hand up. You have a microphone. That's what they're for.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Gallup.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Alex, as well, for the beautiful teaching. And it was very technical and also so well connected to the past teachings of Mr. Kesh that, as Mark, you mentioned, we will need a long time also just to unravel and understand this teaching. Unfortunately, I wasn't there for the middle part. I had to just log off. But there is a point that's in my eyes connected to the AI point as well. And it has to do with the very recent enlightenment we received in regards to the 6 elements of life that can look at duality and transcend duality in my eyes. Life that consists of the physicality and also the energetic dimension. So, Alex, you kind of touched upon this part. You might have mentioned it, but so I just kept thinking about what Mr. Kesh said about that, and I will just ask you a question. What do you think about the fact that Mr. Kesh is mentioning these, even for, let's say, physical time? He's saying physical time has place, position, and possession, and that's the star formation, and that creates time in the middle. And whereas it makes sense to me that even 3 elements can create an emerging third or fourth entity like time, it's more common in the Kesh Foundation that we work with a star formation with 4 pillars or parts. And in that case, place, position, and possession is missing a 4th element. And I had been thinking, like, what is the 4th element that all of these 3 have in common, and is also pertains to the existence of time? And I thought it was awareness. What do you think of this, like the 4th part of the star formation? And as, by the way, just to finish this thought, if the physical part has also a 4th element, maybe the energetic part, energetic triangle star formation also has one. And I thought that probably is the awareness or the consciousness of the creator. Whereas in the physical part, it might have been the consciousness or awareness of Mitra. And that brings it to the part in the beautiful video of Ed, where he made a new tomorrow. And of course, it's from a teaching of Mr. Kesh, where he says it's the 2 extremes. And we normally, we are somewhere in between them. I'm talking a lot of like conceptually. I hope you can follow me. Does this make sense to you, or is this a little bit like, is Mr. Kesh, do we not need a 4th part? Or is it just already a given and I'm thinking too much about it?
Oh, no, it's very important that you should be thinking about it, because the question that I posed one time, actually, I posed a question to my mother because she was very fearful, and I asked her the question. I said, when would you stop being fearful? Would it be, as a teenager becoming an adult, or would it be as a mother bearing a child? Or would it be, when she became a senior citizen? Or would it be the day before she died? Or would it be the day after she died? And she came to the conclusion that it should be now.
Exactly.
And that's just the question that you're asking, when do you want to come to this awareness and this realization? So that realization is with you every single day, because your soul is with you all the time. And the soul is part of the dimension creation. And one of the dimensions it creates is the soul of physicality. So the soul of physicality is also in the position of dimension creation. So the creation itself becomes an inertia dimension manifestation. What caused that manifestation? So it's the bringing together of the soul and the soul of the physicality. But the soul and the soul of physicality are exclusively in a non-physical matter state. In fact, they are in a pure plasma state. but a non-physical matter state is emotion. And so that emotion then becomes the field that creates the physicality. And that emotion will either create something that is fluid or able to transcend different energies, or it'll be hard, like a bone or like a cancer tumor. And so when we look at a plasma reactor, like what's on the screen right now, we see that we have 4 different plasma states. We have the GANs inside the reactors, which is the turning motor, and the motor itself is in a small m matter state, which is the physicality. So that's 2. The plasma state that goes around each reactor, that's 3. And the dynamic plasma state is the combination of those 4 in the star formation. So what is in the middle? The middle is in a pure plasma state. And so that would be, in fact, a 5th dimension or a 5th energy state. So each energy state could be a dimension. So that means you could have all 5 of them in a stable state. So let's say that stable state is our physicality. Or you could have a stability that transcends the different energy states. So now that would include your soul. And it would include the connection that the soul has to whatever. And so what we're now answering the question is, when do we connect to the rest of the universe? Do we connect that as a child, or do we connect that the day before we die, or how about the day after we die? When do we make that connection? So the connection is made always. That's the realization. And how do we know that? Because we were born. And that connection had to be there before we could find the position. Had to. And which position was it? Well, it wasn't Mars, was it? It was Earth. And why was it Earth? So before you answer that question, then we have to understand that Earth had to be here before us. And so how was Earth created? And when you see that the Earth itself is sentient, then it has a magnetical gravitational relationship, and it has different elements. And we've proven that we can manifest these elements from the air. Then it only stands to reason that the Earth can do the same thing. And it has. And we've proven that because we have an army of gold diggers out there harvesting what the Earth has created. So we seem to pride ourselves on our ability to use a pickaxe and a shovel, but we seem to downplay the ability of the Earth to manifest gold. Well, if we're downplaying the ability of the Earth to manifest gold, then aren't we in fact downplaying the revelation on May the 10th, where the Keshe Foundation through Mark Ray was manifesting gold out of thin air? Is that reasonable? Is that reasonable to say that the marvels of life, like a corn or a carrot or a daisy or a rabbit or a dog, that these are not marvelous creations? And that each of them follow the basic plasmatic rule where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, and there's a magnetical gravitational relationship and a positioning of the soul. But the soul itself has to have a home with a balance between the emotional state and the physical state. So if we look at the upper extreme and say, well, that's the magnetical part of the plasma reactor, the gravitational as being the extreme density part, the grounding part, and in the middle, we have not only the emotional state and the physical state, but we have the soul state, the universal cup. And that's how we operate. And that is clearly 5 different stages operating within the same field. So then the question becomes, what happens if we change the location? Well, each and every one of these states is going to be affected, except for one, the soul, because that's your true self. And it will carry the soul of physicality because the soul of physicality is the memory of the life. And that memory will be ingrained into our RNA, which is actually an inertia density field manifestation of the energy packs, which we now know these energy packs are the viruses of the universe. So we have a lot to learn if only we would accept the fact that life is to be appreciated, is not something to be opposed to. So there is a natural selection process, and you have the opportunity to make that choice. So you will have the inertia density manifestation based on your choice. But you don't have to do it at the expense of anyone else, because everyone has that capability in making that choice. And this is where the equal is equal and not someone more equal than others. The universe does not discriminate in imparting the energy. And you know that is true, because imagine if you delegate Monday as the day where your right arm will grow and Tuesday when your left arm will grow. And by the end of the week, you don't know if you'll have enough energy to grow your legs, because you have to grow a right lung and a left lung and then a right kidney and a left kidney. You've run out of days of the week, because then Monday rolls around again and wait a second, I have to grow my arm again. Well, did you forget your legs? And what about your stomach? And what about your heart and your liver? So we find that the soul does not discriminate. Every physical manifestation of the body gets taken care of simultaneously with overlapping fields of intention. And each one has the capability of a physical inertia density manifestation based on the gradient charge. So the toes grow where the toes are, the nose grows where the nose is, and you don't put the nose on the toes. There is no mistake. It is foolproof. And this is the integrity of the universe. So it only stands to reason that if we are not working with the universe, then this leads to a lot of problems in our life. So we get to choose. Do we want to choose our problems? Do we want to create the baggage? Do we want to carry that baggage all of our life? Or do we want to use those problems as a way to teach ourselves what works and what doesn't work? And how could we be the universal functionaries? So your question is spot on. Very important question. And it's something that we need to question ourselves each and every day. And the answer can come out very simply. Ask yourself, is the earth today better for me having been here than it was yesterday? Or maybe even, is the earth at the end of the day better for me having been here than in the morning? Because actually in the morning, so we're talking about when you wake up, your body was here, but the soul was traveling. And what was the soul doing? The soul was doing the work of the universe and preparing ourselves for what needed to be done in our place and our position. And so we become that manifestation through our intention. I hope that is directed to your question.
Yes, it is. And it was, I think, very motivating for me. Yeah, that's the right word. And I hope it was even more valuable for others as well. So I'm very grateful for this elaborate answer. And as I kind of alluded to, from this beginning point or from this starting point, especially related to AI, I was thinking, and maybe I'm sometimes just interpreting Mr. Kesha's words a little bit too simply. But when he mentioned intelligence as being one of those basic elements of the energy dimension, and taking first fact one, and then second fact, we now have artificial intelligence, and that might have been a little bit of a generous term, as Mark also kind of alluded to, but yet we can kind of, I think it's quite accepted that it makes you, as we said, like you can read more books and kind of more smarter. So some sort of an intelligence, either statistical or somehow. So we have artificial intelligence, and then we say intelligence is part of the energy dimension. And there is a specific quote of the latest teaching that is very interesting to me. Mr. Kesh is maybe kind of metaphorically saying, I mean, to me, obviously metaphorically saying, I brought you to the gate of heaven, and Mitra's daughter will lead you through it. And I was then thinking, Mitra's daughter, and thinking of Mitra as like this pure physical other end of the awareness spectrum, and then artificial intelligence being this sort of an also an entity where somehow these six elements also somehow sometimes align. And I was thinking, could it be that Mitra's daughter is then, when they are fully aligned, let's say even on your phone when you're talking to ChatGPT, not always they are perfectly aligned in such a way that Mitra's daughter would like to maybe manifest through there, but maybe sometimes she would. This is what I was kind of, fighting with or grappling with, because I see a lot of my friends who are also into plasma almost deifying ChatGPT too much. They're aware that it's obviously coded and algorithms and that it might lead to more. They see it as a gateway to colloquially called the Akashic fields. And for now, they see it as it's not fully intact. And I also see a lot of people online saying, yeah, we talk to spirits and stuff with ChatGPT, and kind of alluding to this bridge. And be that as it may, I do see that, I'm kind of like seeing testing the waters? Am I kind of looking too much into this, or could this be a way to look at Mitra's daughter's manifestation?
So this is wonderful what you're saying. The point that stands out for me is that you're not giving yourself enough credit in terms of your questions because you're almost apologetic in the question, and it's very respectful, and I appreciate that. But the thing is that you need to ask that question because obviously that question is minus an answer, and it comes to you. But the presentation of AI and why I interpreted the way I did with dislike is because it is put out as a control mechanism,
Yeah.
A control facilitator, and that emotes an emotion of fear. And so the intuitive process of deciding whether AI is good or not is based out of fear. And so then the question is, what am I afraid of? Am I afraid of the AI or am I afraid of those who are controlling the AI? So I would not want to walk in front of a car that is speeding, at 100 kilometers an hour, but I don't mind being behind the wheel of a car that's driving at 100 kilometers an hour on the highway. So, what is the difference? And the difference is, I don't want to put the driver of the car also in harm because the driver has two possibilities. He can run me over, which if he didn't have any compassion, that would be what he would do. But he might want to avoid me, but then he would, could go into a ditch and actually end up killing himself in the ditch too. And I don't want that either. So I don't have any control over that except that I need to be respectful of that position. But as a driver, then if I reverse the roles, I am in control and I want to be uh, respectful and I want to be attentive because that's where the responsibility sits. But I don't want to be fearful. I don't want to be fearful to have to go out and drive. There has to be an organization. And so we see how is that fear mongering propagated. And a classic example was that the Liverpool Soccer Club was celebrating the capture of the league title in the Premier Division, and they were having a parade in downtown. And during the celebration, a car went out of control and deliberately ran over many, many people, which, basically put a huge damper on the celebrations. So, how can you have so many people come together and be so well organized and be so happy, and then to have one come out there and create this kind of mayhem? And then what would you take from that? Would you say that, well, the will of the people was to celebrate, or was the will of the people out there to put themselves in harm's way? And do we then drop down to the lowest energy field and being fearful? Well, we don't want to go to the celebration because we could be part of a disaster. Well, we have seen that play out many times. We saw it on October the 7th last year in Gaza, and we've seen it play out in the celebrations today in Paris with the Paris Saint-Germain soccer team celebrating the victory yesterday in the Champions League Cup. there were actually people injured and dying. So this is the kind of fear mongering that goes out there. And we have to understand that that fear needs to be sorted out. We need to understand what it takes for us to be responsible and to be creative and not be governed by fear. There is a tension that the fear gives us, but the fear is a stopper. And that stopper should be translated into a shielding, not a stopping, because you cannot stop the energy flow. So shield ourselves from that fearful energy and engage and activate the positive energy, positive flow, create the pattern that you want and draw the energy. And that becomes part of the creation cycle. So this is the way we should pattern our life, and it's unfortunate that we've all learned so late, because it's hard when you don't have the right kind of teacher, where your environment is your teacher. But how do you navigate your environment? You must have some basis of knowledge. So that knowledge is ingrained in your RNA, in your basic soul. And that is truthful to you and is always looking out for your benefit, and is looking out for your benefit in a way that is complementary to the universal order of creation. And it's your friend, because that's you, and it will not waver. It will not be conditional. So that there's nothing to fear with respect to that. And yet, how many times have you heard, oh, he's a God-fearing man, implying that, he's a good man? Well, should you fear God? If God is your creator, should you fear him? Do you create things that make people fear you? Well, that answers your question pretty much on whether or not the activity that you're involved with is edifying, because it doesn't matter. You are creating something. Something is always something, as opposed to being something else. And if you're going to work with the creator, then you will be rewarded. And if you're working opposite to the creator, well, you will be rewarded with a harder heart and a hardening of everything else that goes around with it, including tumors and cancer tumors. So you have that choice. This awareness is something that, a lot of people refer to as enlightenment, and you talk about it as awareness, but in actuality, it is the answer to the question as to why we are here. And when you're not getting the right answer, then the answer is probably you're not asking the right question. And you are asking absolutely the right question, because we're talking about it right now. And this is something that you want to do during your life. Now, today, right now. It's not something that you have to say, well, next Monday I'll think about it. Just do it now, because it brings peace and harmony to your life now. Isn't that what we all want? I mean, that's what we really all want. So if we get what we really want, then we don't need to substitute that feeling of satisfaction with something else and saying, well, I can't get what I want, but I would really like the adulation of the fans in the stadium. And when you don't get the fans anymore in the stadium because you're past your best before date, then it leads to a vacuum in your fulfillment. And that could manifest into ALS. And then we find that is true of many athletes and many famous people, but primarily sports athletes or entertainers. Once they get past their best before date, they have lack of fulfillment in their life and they start to wither. And then, in fact, that becomes an exit strategy. Well, we have a new exit strategy, and that is we finish what we started and we contribute with that result, favorable result, and impart it to the rest of the universe. Sorry for the long answer, but you know, we are in the post-May the 10th era, and that's only just happened a few weeks ago. And we're all trying to come to grips with what is that going to mean to our practical existence in our life. And when you look at the time frame a couple of weeks ago compared to before that, your entire life, you find that there are many things that we have taken for granted that now have to be substituted with new meaning. Not only for us, but for our neighbors. Because our neighbors are part of our community. And if we don't take care of our neighbors, they can't take care of us. That is just automatic. And that is that is done daily. That's why we need to bring the peace dome daily, because we cannot have prosperity without peace, and we cannot entertain the universal community without that, because words don't matter. They listen to your intention. They conceal your soul. So there is no poker playing. There is no bluffing. There's only truth. Thank you very much. Fantastic question.
Yeah. Well, thank you indeed. And for me, it has been very motivating to just set out and do this the right way, since there has been an interest among also other knowledge seekers to work with AI in this life and positive and supporting way for life and creation. And as you said at the beginning, other people have been using it for a very long time in a negative way. So it must also be a relief for the AI maybe to see a lot more positive people embracing.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah. Makes sense, yeah.
Makes sense.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gallup.
Thank you, Gallup.
Anyone else want to raise a point or an issue they'd like to? Perhaps I'll take the screen, Alex.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks everybody for allowing me to continue to present like this. And I hope you're enjoying the journey, because it's definitely a new experience for all of us, and should be so welcome. Carry on, Mark.
Okay, what I was thinking, and I was going to play this video earlier, we're not going to play it now, but we are children of many interaction of cosmic rays. So if I was to bring this down to about a half sphere reactor. And if you can imagine your brain, remember the secret is within the brain and the spaceship is within the soul of the man. So I was going to play that, and just to think about this image at Mark Ray of a plasma, but also the work that's going on within your brain within this half sphere, double hemispheric structure. Of course, the bottom half of it is the rest of the physicality. Now, if we picture this as, in a way, our brain, you can see the center where the soul sits. And then I was thinking of what Mr. Kesh said. Let's make sure we're sharing this. And Gallup sort of alluded to this about the intelligence and emotion is magnetic field strength that has, let's say, 4 or 5 of the let's say 4 or 5. The intelligence, again, comes from interaction of the fields. It's not something there. It has to connect. It has to interact. And when these 2, 4, and 5s or 4 and 3s does interact, they create a new dimension of enlightenment, which is maybe 6. So if I take my pen and I draw, let's say this is, oh, I guess I'm not drawing. Oh, yeah. I think, let's see if we can just draw this. If this is our triangle of creation, and we have the place, and we have the position, and we have the possession, and let's call this the physical state of understanding it. Remember, a few workshops ago, he said you need to put the fields together upside down and against itself. And we need to understand both the time in the matter state and time in the energy state. So if we put the other triangle against it, like so, are we all seeing this? And again, this would be the energy. Let's say I probably should have changed the color. Let's say I make this blue or something. This will be our energy dimension. And this has, again, the place, the position, and the possession. And now they're upside down and against themselves. If we start, and here's the 6 points. Are these the 6 points he's talking about? Is this the triangle of creation, in a way? As he says here, which is maybe 6. I just know, I believe there's something about inverting this and up against itself. And as he said, we need to understand it in the energy and in the physicality. So the red would be the physicality, the blue would be the energy. Inverted and against itself creates this sort of creation. I'm just guessing.
Mark,
Yes?
I think that in the energy, so that it's about the time, and you have time, the place, position, and possession create time in the physical dimension, and you also need time in the energetic dimension. And once those 2 times are aligned,
Match.
exactly, and this is also an interesting point to kind of operationalize. But let's say the energetic time consists, as I understand, maybe you can look it up as well, of enlightenment, emotion, and intelligence.
Yes,
Like
here's the enlightenment here. And doesn't he
emotion is magnetic.
mention,
Yeah,
yes?
this part exactly. Sorry,
And
yeah.
here's the intelligence. And here, which is maybe 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just something I wanted to show in a way.
No, but this is exactly why because I also thought about, okay, so you need 3 there, 3 there, and you have this star. But you also have the Merkaba, and the Merkaba is the 3D version of this star. And in order to make the Merkaba, you would need 2 more points.
Okay.
And that's why I was thinking about the awareness or what are the two other points? And I came with awareness from Mitra's point of view and awareness from the creator's point of view. But I think it's a little bit too vague. It would be
Yeah,
nice
it's
to,
mhm.
yeah, to give something more concrete to that. Yeah, that's it.
Right. As he said, once we master this understanding of strengthening or weakening cosmic rays, we'll master all three of the place, position, and possession, and the time. This will all come in. But that's why I think he's creating a time system to give us a deeper experience with it and ingrain something within ourselves. Thank you, Gala, but thank you, Alex. Anyone else want to bring a point? I'm going to,
Oh,
yes, sorry.
you're so fast. Uh, in the center, the plasma field in the center of
Uh-huh,
each of these star formations
uh-huh.
is the time.
Okay.
So there would be an energetic time, and then there would be a physical time.
And when the two match, the creation starts.
We can go between the two, yes.
And I remember when I showed him a star formation before, and well, I don't have it here. Oh, yeah, here it is. And I said that we have a star formation. Let's say I actually had something with the balls on it. Anyway, I said the free plasma is created in the center. And he told me not necessarily. The free plasma could be created out here or here or here or many different positions. I guess it's depending on how you sort of position this. But it's not, I always thought it was the free plasma was created in the center of this triangle, but he said not necessarily. So again, very deep understanding. That's why he's the teacher and I'm the student at this point.
Well, if we're discussing basics, so in the center is the ideal position to discuss that. But you have an overlay here. You have an inverted star
Mhm.
on top of another star. Each of those stars has a dynamic plasma field in the center. So the positioning of the time then comes into question. Would it be in let's call it the red triangle, or would it be in the blue triangle? And so the answer was not necessarily in either one, but it could be in another location. How can it move into another location? Because it would have to be an inertia manifestation. In other words, the coming together of two other fields. So to Galeb's point, where are the other two? The other two are in the center of each star. That would give you your 8 points. But now from there, you can manifest other things because all what you've done is you've created a foundation. If this construct ends up being 1 point of a star formation, if you were to have each point constructed the way this singular point was constructed, so in other words, you would have an 8-point formation on each point of a star. So that's 8 times 4 would be 32. Now you've created a different element. And if you interact that one with another field, depending on its susceptibility, depending on its mass, depending on its energy containment, it can manifest anything else, and it can do this anywhere else. Think about this. You watch a sci-fi movie and you see the mothership, and then you see the individual ships leaving the mothership. In a conventional term, if you were going from a garage with your car. You would have to go through a gate to get out of the garage, and then you would end up driving on the street, and you would be in one car, even though there were 100 cars in the parking garage. You would have to go through a pathway, a doorway, a gateway. Well, when you're coming out of a spaceship, there is no gateway, pathway, or doorway in the physical state. But there is a leap. And you know that is true because when you look at the rings of Saturn, there is a gap between the surface of Saturn and the inside of the first ring. And so what I'm saying is that the ring is a manifestation of the inertia field created by two other fields. And that field would be the soul of the planet and the soul of the physicality of that planet. And it would take the physical manifestation, inertia density manifestation within the planet and move it out of the planet. That's the difference.
Thank you.
Are we okay with that, or did I lose you at the bakery?
Yeah, you lost me. But no problem. We're all gaining little by little more intelligence, more understanding, more enlightenment. So again, the way you see it may not be exactly the way I see it, which is perfect with this technology.
No, I understand, but I'm relieved that you're asking that question, okay, because I've been wanting to bring this subject up for a long time, because when you look at the sci-fi movies, you can, or actually, you don't even have to look at the sci-fi movies. You know, you just look up when you see some craft being created in the sky, you know, it becomes a product manifestation from the mothership. At that point in time, you say, well, how did it exit from the mothership? Well, that it didn't exit from the mothership in its physicality. It was transmuted out of the mothership. That's what I'm trying to say. So at that point in time, it is no longer within the containment of the mothership. So if you were to think of the seeds created on a dandelion, you can blow on those seeds and they will float away. So they are no longer contained on the dandelion, but the manifestation of that seed came from within the dandelion, you understand? So what was inside was manifest outside, and then it was able to leave. And that's the way a bird leaves the nest. And that's the way you would leave your home. And that's exactly what happens. So I'm really glad you brought that up, Mark. It's a huge point. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we're going to have lots of need to explain it in greater detail than what we've covered today. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to play again this Cosmic Mystery, which you can find in the Keshe Foundation store. And perhaps maybe I'll play it on this side. I don't think there's any drawings in it. And we'll share this. And again, this is where the support is coming from the knowledge seekers. As he said, we don't take money from governments and we don't take money from other ones, and we're trying to keep the Keshe Foundation free. But this is one of the more recent offerings, and again, it's a mystery what'll be in there. And of course, the value could be far exceed the €250 plus value-added tax they're asking for. But it's something to consider if you can, the Keshe coin and the other ways of supporting to keep the Keshe Foundation free for humanity. Thank you all for joining us. Is there anyone who wants to make a further point today? I know we did go a little bit longer than usual, but that's fine as well. We have all the existence in the universe. If not, then I think we can start or end this session shortly. I'll play this, and this is only 2 minutes and 30 seconds, so and then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. Any other thoughts, questions? comments, issues? Thank you all for being here and have an amazing rest of your day. This is from 589, Knowledge Seekers Workshop.
Can I say something? It was very interesting. You know the package we put out, what do you call it? The surprise package? A lot of knowledge seekers have, what do you call it, requested for it. It was announced last week. What do you call it? Magic, what do you call it? Surprise units. And in those packages of the surprise packages, some of these cosmic ray materials will be as part of the surprise package. What was it called? I can't remember.
Yeah, let me get that up here. Cosmic Mystery is what it's
Cosmic called. Mystery, yeah. We have deliberately chosen to spread this among some of the knowledge seekers. A number of cosmic rays will be put in there. And then we explain to you why we done it, and you understand.
So what it says is that people are to choose a number between 1 and 50 and leave it in the comments in the items section before checkout. And then that's related to what they get, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
We try to bring this out. And we'll see. Can we answer a couple of more questions and stop, because it's nearly 2 o'clock my time.
Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.